It was supposed to be the kind of afternoon people dream about: warm sunlight, a soft breeze, and no obligations. Emily Ross thought she had nothing to worry about. But in less than an hour, a stranger's urgent voice would echo her exact address over a 911 call, shattering her sense of safety forever. Emily Ross leaned back in her lounge chair, tilting her head toward the sun like a sunflower. The warmth settled into her skin, loosening the knots in her shoulders and softening the lines of tension that had etched themselves into her face over the last few months. She was in her backyard, a space she had worked hard to turn into her personal oasis. The patio was framed by potted plants overflowing with greenery, and the scent of jasmine drifted through the air, mixing with the faint aroma of freshly cut grass from a neighbor's lawn. Beyond the fence, the soft hum of a distant lawnmower blended with the rhythmic hiss of her sprinklers, creating a soundtrack of suburban peace. It was rare for Emily to take a moment like this. Since moving into this house 6 months ago, she had been caught up in a constant swirl of work deadlines, errands, and the subtle, exhausting effort of settling into a new neighborhood. Today, though, she had decided to give herself permission to do nothing. No phone calls, no cleaning, no thinking about the endless to-do list that seemed to refill itself overnight. Just sun, a chill glass of iced tea, and the soft cushion of her lounge chair. Her tabby cat, Milo, had stretched himself along the edge of the deck, his fur rising and falling with the rhythm of sleep. A pair of butterflies danced lazily over the flower bed, and the occasional car that rolled by on the street beyond was muted like background noise in a dream. Emily closed her eyes, letting the sunlight paint the inside of her eyelids in shades of red and gold. She'd chosen this neighborhood for exactly this reason. The quiet. It wasn't that her old place had been dangerous, but she had grown tired of the constant noise, the unpredictable shouting from the apartment next door, and the unsettling feeling that someone was always watching. Here, in this small, tree-lined cul-de-sac, the loudest thing she usually heard was the laughter of children playing 2 houses down. Still, she had noticed that moving somewhere new meant starting over in more ways than one. She had neighbors she waved but didn't really know, streets she still had to remind herself to turn down, and routines that hadn't quite settled in. The grocery store clerk recognized her now, but she doubted the woman even knew her name. The man who lived directly across the street, she thought his name was Carl, seemed friendly enough, but they had never spoken beyond polite hellos. As she sipped her iced tea, a light breeze carried the faint, sweet smell of honeysuckle over the fence. The sun was high enough to warm her legs, but not so hot that she needed to retreat into shade. This, she thought, was a life she had been working toward. A place where she could breathe, without feeling like the world was pressing in on her. Her phone sat face down on the small table beside her, screen dark. She had muted it earlier, determined to ignore work emails and the endless scroll of social media. If something important happened, she figured, it could wait a couple of hours. The world had survived without her input before. It would survive again. For a moment, she considered turning on some music, maybe something soft and acoustic to match the mood, but decided against it. Silence, or at least this kind of gentle suburban silence, was a luxury she didn't want to waste. Milo gave a sleepy flick of his tail, the only acknowledgement that he was aware of her presence. Emily's mind wandered to the coming week. There were a few projects at work she needed to wrap up, a dentist appointment she'd been putting off, and the nagging thought that she should finally introduce herself properly to the couple living next door. But even as those thoughts surfaced, she pushed them away. Not now. Right now. There was only the sun, the flowers, and the steady rhythm of water sprinkling over her lawn. She glanced toward the small bird bath she'd placed near the corner of the yard. A pair of sparrows had landed there, dipping their beaks into the water and splashing their wings before darting off again. Emily smiled to herself, feeling a small swell of contentment. She had built this little sanctuary piece by piece, and it was finally starting to feel like hers. From somewhere in the distance came the faint echo of a car horn, followed by the low rumble of a delivery truck. She thought nothing of it. Life in this neighborhood had a steady, predictable flow, and she was beginning to sink herself to its rhythm. Even the occasional wail of a siren, rare as it was, felt muted here, like a reminder that trouble existed elsewhere, far enough away to ignore. The day had been so peaceful that she barely noticed a shift in the air. It was subtle at first, the kind of change you couldn't quite put your finger on. A stillness, maybe, or the way the sounds around her seemed to thin out, as though the neighborhood itself were holding its breath. She sat up a little, taking a slow sip of tea, but dismissed the thought as her imagination. Emily had always been sensitive to atmosphere. In her old city apartment, she could tell if an argument was about to break out 2 floors below before it even started. Here, she assumed the occasional flicker of unease was just the result of adjusting to quieter surroundings. Still, the faint prickle along the back of her neck was harder to ignore. She shifted her chair slightly, angling herself so she could see more of the street through the narrow gap in her fence. The road looked the same as always, empty, except for a lone bicyclist pedaling lazily toward the end of the block. A moment later, a blue sedan turned the corner and rolled past at an unhurried pace. Nothing unusual. Emily leaned back again, telling herself to relax. Whatever strange tension she was picking up was probably just her mind playing tricks on her. But as she closed her eyes once more, she couldn't shake the faint, inexplicable sense that her afternoon had just crossed an invisible line. One she wouldn't notice until it was too late. What she didn't know, as the sprinklers kept hissing and Milo stretched lazily in the sun, was that less than a mile away, someone had just dialed 911. The call would be brief, urgent, and life-changing. And within the hour, her quiet backyard would become the epicenter of something she never could have prepared for. Emily didn't yet know that in the space of a single hour, her life would tilt on its axis. All she knew, in that moment, was that she was perfectly comfortable, perfectly still. The shadows from the fence had stretched a little farther across the yard, a slow reminder that the afternoon was moving on without her needing to do anything at all. She swirled the melting ice in her glass, listening to the soft clink of cubes against the sides, and felt an almost childlike satisfaction at how simple everything was. The move to this house had been a gamble. 6 months ago, she'd been standing in the kitchen of her cramped apartment in the city, weighing the pros and cons of uprooting her life. On paper, it had made sense. The rent was skyrocketing, her neighbors were unpredictable, and she was tired of the thin walls that let every argument, television show, and slammed door bleed into her space. But there was a safety in familiarity, even if it came with inconvenience. Here, she had to start from scratch. Her old neighborhood had been a constant buzz of activity. Street vendors shouting over each other to advertise their food, delivery bikes weaving through traffic, music spilling from open windows at all hours. At first, she missed that chaotic rhythm, the sense that you could step outside at any hour and find something happening. Here, the days seemed to pass in a gentler loop. Morning joggers, school drop-offs, a lull in the early afternoon, then the small burst of activity as people returned from work. It was different, quieter, but in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Emily adjusted the brim of her wide straw hat, feeling the warmth of the sun shift across her face. She could still picture her first day here, standing in the driveway surrounded by unpacked boxes, wondering if she'd made a mistake. The street had been so still that afternoon that she thought she'd stepped into a painting. Perfect blue sky, leaves rustling in a soft breeze, no shouting, no honking, no blaring sirens. She'd spent the first week waiting for something to disturb it. Nothing had. Her parents had been skeptical about the move. You don't even know anyone there, her mother had said on one of their last phone calls before Emily left. What if you need help? Emily had brushed it off at the time, reminding her mother that people in small neighborhoods looked out for one another. That was part of the appeal, or so she thought. But in 6 months, She'd realized that while the neighbors were polite, they weren't exactly inviting. She wasn't unfriendly, but she had a knack for keeping herself, and perhaps they'd picked up on that. Still, she'd managed to find her own little routine. Morning coffee on the porch. A quick walk around the block before starting work. Afternoons in the backyard when the weather was nice, like today. She begun to recognize faces. The tall man with the golden retriever. The elderly woman with a garden so meticulously kept it look like something from a magazine. She didn't know their names, but she knew their patterns, and in a way, that was its own kind of familiarity. The ice in her glass had nearly melted, leaving just a few slivers bobbing in the pale amber liquid. She took the last sip and set the glass down, thinking she'd go inside for a refill. As she stood, she glanced toward the far corner of the yard, where the bird bath still shimmered in the sunlight. A few petals from the nearby roses had fallen into water, drifting lazily on the surface. Milo had moved from the deck to a shaded patch of grass, his head lifting briefly as she passed before settling back down. Inside, the house felt cooler, the air carrying the faint scent of the lavender candle she'd burned earlier. She moved through the kitchen, her bare feet making soft taps on the hardwood floor. The refrigerator door gave a small suction pop as she opened it, releasing a wave of chilled air that made her skin prickle. She poured fresh tea into her glass, added ice, and stood for a moment looking out the kitchen window. From this angle, she could see a sliver of the street, empty. Still, she thought again about how quiet it was here. There had been a time, early on, when she'd found it unsettling, almost too still, as if she were waiting for a sound that never came. She'd grown up in a busy suburb where the hum of traffic was a constant backdrop, so this kind of quiet had felt unnatural at first. But now, she'd learned to appreciate it. It was a kind of quiet that let you hear small things. The creak of tree branches in the wind, the rustle of a squirrel darting through leaves, the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. And yet, she couldn't help noticing that today's stillness was different. It wasn't just quiet, it was weighted, somehow, like the pause before someone finishes a sentence. She carried her drink back outside, easing herself into the lounge chair once more. The sun had shifted, and she adjusted the angle so her legs were stretched fully into the light. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth soak in again, and tried to let her mind drift. For a while, she succeeded. Thoughts came and went without urgency. What she might cook for dinner, whether she should water the ferns later, if she'd have time to read a chapter of her book before bed. Then, faintly, she heard something, not loud enough to be intrusive, but distinct enough to pull her attention. She tilted her head slightly, listening. It wasn't the hum of a car or the chirp of a bird. It was static, maybe, like the crackle of a radio turned down low. Emily frowned and sat up, scanning the yard. It wasn't coming from her property. That much she could tell. The sound seemed to be drifting in from somewhere beyond the fence, carried on the same soft breeze that stirred the leaves of her potted basil. For a moment, she thought it might be someone working on a car with the radio on, or maybe a delivery driver with a dispatch system running in the background. She was about to dismiss it when she caught something in the noise. A voice. Clearer now, firm, professional, clipped in the way people speak when they're trained to stay calm under pressure. She couldn't make out the words at first. They were broken up by bursts of static, as if the signal was struggling to hold. Then a few syllables slipped through, sharp enough to send a faint shiver up her spine. Emily leaned forward, listening harder, and then she heard it, her address, spoken clearly without hesitation, as if the person saying it had read it directly from a piece of paper. For a second, Emily froze, wondering if she'd misheard. The voice was faint, almost swallowed by the soft crackle that came before and after it, but she was certain she'd caught it correctly. Her own address, street name, house number, spoken with the kind of clipped precision that left no room for misunderstanding. Her first instinct was to glance around, as though the person speaking might somehow be standing just outside her fence. But the yard was empty, save for Milo still dozing in the shade, tail twitching lazily. The street beyond the gap in the fence looked as quiet as it had 5 minutes ago. She swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe it was just a coincidence. There had to be other houses with the same number somewhere else in the city. Dispatchers probably rattled off dozens of addresses every hour. What were the odds this one actually referred to her? The radio crackled again, pulling her focus back toward the sound. It was coming from somewhere to her right, beyond the fence, maybe from a parked vehicle on the street or a house with an open window. She strained to catch more words, her ears tuning out the softer noises of the afternoon. Officers en route, possible medical, standby. The words were disjointed, fractured by static, but the tone was unmistakable. Whoever was speaking was not a neighbor casually chatting on a walkie-talkie. This was professional, urgent. Emily could picture it. A dispatcher hunched over a console, head tilted toward a headset microphone, eyes fixed on a glowing screen. She set her glass down on the small table with a muted clink and rose from the lounge chair, moving quietly toward the fence. The boards were high enough to block most of her view, but through a narrow slat she caught a flash of movement, the glint of sunlight on metal, the dark outline of a vehicle's roof. She shifted her position, trying to get a better angle, but the sound faded slightly as she moved. Then the voice returned, sharper this time. Repeat, address, caller reports. The rest was lost in another burst of static. Emily's pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. She knew her own street name too well to mistake it, and the cadence of the speaker left no doubt. They were reading it for clarity. Someone had given her address to emergency services. She stepped back on the fence, her mind racing. If it was a medical emergency, who could it be for? She lived alone, and she wasn't expecting visitors. Could it be a mistake? A neighbor misreporting something? Or worse, someone deliberately using her address for reasons she couldn't yet understand. Milo lifted his head and looked at her, ears flicking, as though sensing her unease. She forced a breath out and tried to shake off the prickling feeling creeping along her arms. Maybe she should just go inside, lock the doors, and wait. Her phone was still on the small patio table. She picked it up, hesitating before unlocking it. No missed calls. No messages. She opened a news app on reflex. Nothing about any incident nearby. She considered calling her closest neighbor, the elderly woman with the immaculate garden, but stopped herself. What would she even say? "Hi, did you just happen to call 911 and give them my address?" It sounded ridiculous. Instead, she opened her contacts and hovered over the number for the non-emergency police line. She called it once before, months ago, when she found a stray dog wandering down the block. This felt different, more urgent. The radio chatter flared again, closer now, as if whoever carried it had moved toward her street. She caught the tail end of the sentence. Advise units to approach with caution. A chill ran down her spine. That wasn't the kind of instruction given for a simple medical call. She pressed her lips together and moved toward the back door, her eyes scanning the yard one last time. Still nothing out of place. She slipped inside, locking the door behind her, and went straight to the front window. Pulling back the curtain just enough to see out, she scanned the street. At first, she saw nothing unusual. Then, from the far end of the block, a dark SUV rolled into view, moving slowly, almost deliberately. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. It came to a stop halfway down the street, idling in place. Emily's heart thudded in her ears. She told herself it could be anyone, a delivery driver checking directions, a neighbor's visitor, but the timing was too perfect to ignore. She stayed hidden behind the curtain, watching as a figure shifted in the driver's seat. A faint burst of static reached her, though she couldn't make out the words this time. The SUV remained there for a full minute before easing forward again, disappearing around the bend. Emily let the curtain fall back into place and exhaled slowly. The silence that followed was heavier than before, pressing in on her from all sides. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Only 15 minutes had passed since she'd first heard the radio crackle. It felt longer, stretched by the weight of unanswered questions. Her address, spoken by an unseen voice. Instructions for caution. And now a vehicle lingering on her street. She tapped her phone against her palm, debating. Calling the police might seem paranoid, but if something was happening, didn't she have the right to know? She thought about the dispatcher's calm but urgent tone, about how her street number had rolled so cleanly off their tongue. Before she could decide, the radio crackle came again, this time from much closer. Emily turned toward the front door, straining to hear. The words were muffled, but she caught fragments. Arriving from perimeter, confirm. Her stomach tightened. Whoever was talking wasn't blocks away anymore. They were here. Emily's hands trembled as she set her glass of lemonade back onto the small wicker table beside her lounge chair. The condensation left a wet ring that slowly expanded, seeping into the fabric. The warmth of the sun no longer felt like a gentle embrace. It pressed against her skin in a suffocating way. The address. Her address. She wasn't imagining it. She knew exactly what she'd heard. Her heart thudded in her ears, drowning out the faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. For a moment, she told herself it could be a mistake. Dispatchers sometimes read numbers wrong. Streets with similar names got confused all the time. But the voice from the 911 call had been clear, deliberate. She grabbed her phone from the cushion beside her, fingers fumbling as she unlocked it. The bright screen nearly blinded her in the sunlight, and she shaded it with her hand. Squinting at the signal bars, full. Her mind jumped between calling her husband, her sister, or the police directly. Instead, she tapped the contact for Susan, her next-door neighbor. The call rang twice before Susan picked up, her voice casual but curious. "Hey, Em, everything okay?" Emily swallowed. Did you hear anything just now? Like over a scanner or... She trailed off, realizing Susan probably didn't have a police scanner running in her kitchen. "No, I've been inside folding laundry." "Why? You sound weird." Emily hesitated, biting her lip. "I just heard my address over a 911 call. I think it came from the community alerts app I've got." There was a pause, and Emily imagined Susan straightening up, frowning. "Your address? Are you sure?" "Positive." Another pause. "Okay, that's unsettling. But maybe it's a mistake. Do you want to come over?" Emily glanced around the backyard. Everything was still, too still. The gentle breeze from earlier had stopped, and the leaves of the old maple tree hung limp in the heat. "No, not yet. Just keep your phone nearby, all right?" After they hung up, Emily stayed sitting on the edge of her lounge chair, elbows on her knees, staring at the glinting pool water. The shimmering blue surface seemed alien now, its cheerful ripples mocking the unease settling in her chest. She tapped to open the alert app, scrolling for updates. There was nothing. No follow-up, no clarification. Just the initial audio clip, still pinned at the top. Somewhere, far off, a faint wail of sirens began to thread its way into the air. It was distant, maybe several blocks away, but it was there. Emily's pulse quickened. She stood abruptly, nearly tripping on the edge of the chair cushion, and walked toward the sliding glass door that led into her kitchen. Her bare feet stuck slightly to the warm deck boards, the heat radiating through her soles. Inside, the air conditioning hit her skin like a shock. She locked the door behind her, pulling the curtain halfway closed before she realized how paranoid that felt. She forced herself to take a deep breath, filling her lungs slowly, then exhaling. But the breath didn't seem to help. Her chest still felt tight. She picked up her phone again, this time scrolling to her husband's contact. The call went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," she said, her voice lower than usual. "Call me when you get this. Something weird is going on here. I think you should come home." She hung up quickly, not wanting to over-explain until she knew what she was dealing with. The sirens grew louder now. Not constant, 2 or 3 seconds a wail, then fading, then returning again. Her mind raced through every possibility. A break-in? A medical emergency? Someone targeting her specifically? The last thought made her stomach knot. She checked the locks on the front door, then peered through the small gap in the blinds. Across the street, everything looked normal. A delivery van was parked at the corner, the driver sorting packages in the back. A man in jogging shorts passed by, earbuds in, oblivious to anything unusual. Emily stepped away from the window, not want to be seen staring. She moved into the kitchen and grabbed her water bottle. But when she tried to take a sip, her hand shook so badly that a few drops splashed onto the counter. She set it down and braced herself against the cool granite, breathing slowly again. The sirens now seemed close, too close. She could tell they were moving down the main road that cut through their neighborhood. Emily's phone buzzed with a new notification, and her heart skipped. She swiped it open. Alert, emergency response, her street name. That was all it said. No further details. Her legs felt unsteady, but she forced herself toward the hallway that led to the front of the house. Through the side window, she caught sight of red and blue lights reflecting faintly off a neighboring garage. Her first instinct was to open the door, step outside, and see what was going on. But something in her gut told her to stay put. She stood there frozen, the faint roar of an approaching engine vibrating through the ground. A police cruiser sped past her house, sirens blaring, lights flashing wildly. Emily pressed her back against the wall, her breath shallow. She could hear another vehicle following, this one an ambulance. The sound swallowed the quiet suburban street, echoing between houses. For the first time that afternoon, Emily wished she had someone else here with her. The silence inside her home felt like a thin barrier against whatever was happening outside. The sirens began to fade slightly, moving farther down her street. Emily stepped toward the window again, just enough to catch a glimpse of them turning the corner at the end. She exhaled in relief, but it was short-lived. If they weren't stopping here, then why had her address been read aloud? She backed away from the window, her mind spinning faster now. 1,000 scenarios replayed in her head, each more unsettling than the last. The sunlight streaming through the blinds painted warm stripes across her living room floor, but instead of comfort, it made the empty space feel exposed, vulnerable. She returned to the kitchen, setting her phone on the counter, but she didn't move far from it. Every small creak of the house, every distant car door slam, made her flinch. Emily had never thought her quiet suburban street as threatening, but in that moment, it felt like something unseen was circling closer. When her phone buzzed again, she snatched it up immediately. This time it was a text from Susan. 2 cop cars and an ambulance just went by. They stopped a few houses down. I'll keep you posted. Emily typed back quickly. Please do. She leaned against the counter, staring at the faint movement of tree shadows outside. The heat from earlier was still heavy in the air, pressing against the windows. Somewhere beyond the stillness, voices carried faintly, a cluster of them, urgent but not panicked. She couldn't make out the words. Emily thought going down the street, seeing for herself, but her feet refused to move. Until she knew more, she would stay right here. But with every passing second, the question gnawed at her. Why had her address been called out in the first place? Emily stood just inside her front door, hand resting on the knob, listening. The faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street drifted into a crack, blending with the chirp of late summer cicadas. Everything sounded normal, but it didn't feel normal. She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, the late afternoon sun warming her skin. From here, she could see most of the block, and it was different. Not wrong exactly, but off in a way she couldn't immediately name. A couple stood on the sidewalk across the street, angled toward one another as if mid-conversation, but their eyes weren't locked on each other. They kept darting back to Emily's house. Each time she shifted her weight or moved her hands, their voices would lower to a whisper. At the corner, a man leaned against a lamppost, his phone in one hand, his gaze fixed squarely in her direction. He didn't move when she looked back at him, didn't even pretend to be checking messages. The sound of a car rolling slowly down the block made her glance to her left. It was an older sedan, moving far into the speed limit. The driver's head turned to track her house as they passed. Emily swallowed hard. She had no idea she was imagining it, but she could feel the edges of attention pressing in from all sides. She stepped down to the sidewalk, pretending to check her mailbox just to test the reaction. The couple's whispering stopped abruptly. The man on the corner lifted his chin slightly, like he was taking a mental snapshot. The driver of the sedan looked up at his rear-view mirror instead of the road ahead. Emily forced herself to keep her movements casual, lifting the mail, a single flyer for pizza delivery, and scanning it as if it had her full attention. A gust of warm wind rustled the leaves and the maples lining the street, but it didn't break the tension. In fact, it made her skin prickle. She had the sharp, undeniable sense that someone, maybe more than one person, was waiting for her to do something specific. The problem was, she had no idea what. She turned and headed back toward the house, but not before glancing at the man on the corner again. He didn't look away. Her heart thudded against her ribs as she reached for the door handle. Inside, the air felt heavier. Emily locked the door, this time sliding the deadbolt too. She drew the curtains in the living room, letting the soft fabric filter the light, and then sat down on the couch, trying to think. The 911 call, the one that had echoed her address, had to be connected to this somehow. She just didn't understand how. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She snatched it up, half expecting another call from an unknown number, but it was a text from her neighbor, Pam. Pam, hey, are you okay? Emily stared at the message for a few seconds before replying. Emily, why? The dots appeared, then vanished, then reappeared as Pam typed and retyped. Pam, I don't want to freak you out, but people have been asking me questions about you. Strangers. Just now, someone stopped me walking the dog and wanted to know if you were home. Emily's stomach turned. She typed quickly. Emily, what do they look like? Pam, tall guy, beard, baseball cap. Look official, but not police. Had a badge on his belt, but I couldn't read it. Emily read the message twice, the hairs on the back of her neck rising. If they weren't police, who were they, and what did they want with her? A loud knock on the door made her jump so hard, she nearly dropped her phone. She froze, listening. The knock came again, harder this time. Whoever it was didn't call out a name, didn't announce themselves. Emily moved to the side window and eased the curtain back just enough to peek out. A woman stood there, mid-40s, dark blazer, hair pulled into a tight bun, holding a folder in one hand. Her expression was unreadable, but her stance was purposeful. Emily's instinct told her not to open the door. She stayed silent, waiting, but the woman didn't leave. She simply stepped back, glanced up at the window like she knew Emily was watching, and then walked toward the street, where a black SUV idled with its engine running. The moment she climbed in, the SUV pulled away, turning the corner without signaling. Emily backed away from the window, pulse racing. She was starting to feel like a deer standing in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by unseen hunters. The sense of being observed was almost physical now, as if it pressed against her skin. She paced the living room, chewing at her thumbnail. Should she call the police? What would she even say? That her neighbors were whispering, a stranger had been staring, and some woman in a blazer had knocked without introducing herself? It sounded paranoid, but paranoia didn't explain the way the air outside seemed to tighten whenever she stepped into it. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Pam. Pam, there's a news van on the next street over. I think they're here for you. Emily stopped pacing. News? About her? Her eyes darted toward the curtained window, and for a wild moment she considered peeking. But what if there was a camera trained right on her front door? She sat down slowly, mind spinning. Something was happening, and it was bigger than she understood. She thought back to the voice on the 911 call, the way it had spoken her address with precision. Someone had set this in motion. And now, the neighborhood was no longer her safe, quiet block It was a stage.